Welcome to the first lesson of the chess course for the beginners. So in this lesson we're going to talk about some of the most important principles, how to start out in chess, what is important in chess, what are some of the first important rules, your very first guidelines to play the game properly. So there's three basic opening principles that you should know. So the first thing is you want to have a good control of the center. So very often I would like to compare the game of chess with football or any other sports game where if you control the middle of the field, it means that if you control the center, you're much faster to go forward for an attack, and at the same time you can send back the defensive players to your king's safety faster than your opponent. That's why it's very important that you're controlling the center. The second thing is you try to develop your pieces as quickly as possible. So as a rule of thumb, only one move per piece. Sometimes there is an exception, but still typically try to take the center. Every single piece goes once and castle as quickly as possible. So this means the king's safety. So you can castle short, you can castle long. I think for the very beginning, it's important just to learn to castle short, bring the king to safety, take the center, and keep eyes open. Let me start with some examples. So what is the center of the board? So in a classical sense, the center of the board are these four squares highlighted with the green circles in the middle of the board: e4, d4, e5, d5 squares. So if you control these squares, it means that you are in great shape to start the game properly. And also the surrounding squares in the blue color, these are the so-called extended center. The extended squares around the center, which of course have a massive influence. So whenever you are fighting or developing your pieces, this is your primary focus, because the one player who controls the center has the better chances to control the game. Why it is important to control the center? As already said, if you control the center, this means you gain more space for your pieces. So if we aggressively push forward the opponents, like I'm talking about e4, I'm talking about d4, we're controlling more surrounding squares with our pieces. We attack opponents' pieces with the pawns, and obviously we are quite happy to trade our pawns for his pieces because the pawns are costing less. Like a typical minor piece costs 3, a pawn is just 1. So that's why, of course, we're very much interested to take the center and maybe try to capture some material. And also having this strong center is going to give you some early attacking chances against the black king, because that's the ultimate goal. Try to checkmate the opponent's king. So what you're trying to do is, even if you don't know any theory, and actually when we talk about the chess theory, what is it? What is chess theory? This is something that some players are really afraid of, and they try to avoid it and playing something else. But actually, when you think about it, chess theory, these are the best moves that are proven in history. So far, hundreds of years of practice has proven that the best way to start the game of chess is taking the center. So that's what we are going to do. We are going to play e4. We are fighting for the surrounding squares. We're opening up the bishop. So let's say black plays e6. He's quite modest, and we play d4. So that's it. We are completely dominating the center. We are positioning the pawns on the best possible squares. So we have pretty mobile pieces. The bishop can go here. The bishop can go here. Typically, the knights are positioned on the third rank, not to block the bishops. And again, then we are keeping our eyes open. But there's one thing I would like to talk about, and that is the so-called mobile center. What does it mean? It means that the center is not fixed. So for some clarity, I think it's a good idea for you that you fix the center as quickly as possible. So I'm talking about pushing the pawn either d4, d5 or e4, e5. And this really works well if you can do it by winning a tempi. A tempi, it means, for example, black has the knight on f6, you play e5, you attack the knight, your opponent is forced to retreat. So we not only fix the center, but we also attack our opponent's piece because he has to retreat. The knight is more valuable than the pawn, and we're gaining space advantage. So let me show you an example. So here we have a mobile center. We have played the opening pretty much perfectly. E4, D4, knight f3. As you see, the C pawns have been traded. And now black is careless. So black should be playing d5. He should try to fix the center. Instead, he played knight e7. Now, there's nothing wrong by continuing simple development. So you could just play moves like knight c3, you could play moves like bishop e2 and castle short and still strictly follow some of the best practice in chess. Bring the king to the safety, then keep sides open. But here, actually, you can advance this pawn. Because after d4, d5, you're fixing the center and you're about to gain valuable time by hitting the knight on c6. Now there's the problem for black. He has no retreats with the knight. Knight b4, you can keep attacking the knight, and knight has to retreat. For example, he goes here, you play something like knight c3, you have a wonderful domination of the center, black takes with a pawn, you take with a pawn, his pieces are awkward. So after d5, let's say black decides to take it, you take on d5, so the knight has to retreat, knight b8, and we fix the center ourselves. So the point is after d6, black has to move the knight because, again, knight is valued more than a pawn. And after knight c6, you play queen e2 check, and that's it. You're winning material. Because after this check, black has to play something like bishop e7. Otherwise, I mean, there's no way. There's no way to escape this check. The king cannot move anywhere. So bishop e7, you just take it, you're winning a piece. And that's it. Now we are thinking about bringing the king to the safety, maybe remove the queen, castle short, and just enjoy this pause of war, which is an extra piece. Another example here. So now the question would be, what do you think, which move struggles to maintain control of the center? So we have three moves. We have f4. This is the f4. We have e5, and we have d5. Now, it might be feeling that, well, this is very similar to the previous example. It's got to be e5. It's got to be e5. We are about to gain tempi, right? Well, actually, I think it's not bad because after d takes on e5, d takes on e5, you are about to gain tempi. And after queen d1 check, you take with the knight, and this knight leaves, and I think you're doing okay. Yeah, this is a pretty decent move. What I don't like from these moves is the move d5, because even though you're fixing the center, the question is, are you not doing this at the expense of developing any other moves, any other pieces? Because d4, d5 generates no threats. It just fixes the center. So I think something like d4, d5 is pretty great when he has the knight on c6. Then you play d5, fix the center, you push his knight, and then you continue your development. So the correct move here is playing f4. And by playing f4, we improve our control of the center. You see, we better control the e5 square. And then we want to play knight f3, put the knight behind the pawn, develop the bishop somewhere active where it supports the center, and again, of course, castle short. Let me show you another example here. Now, black has a mobile center, quite similar to one of the previous examples, and black is thinking about a d4 push. So, we cannot play knight e2, or we cannot play knight f3. This would be bad, because black is going to play d4. And after e takes on d4, e takes on d4, our knight has to move. And actually, you has to be very careful. Black can do to you what we already did to him in the previous example. You're losing a piece. You see, this check is impossible to deal with. You're losing a piece here. So you can't do it. So watch out for this trick. That's why here we have to fix the center. So we play d4. We are fighting for the center. Again, remember, this battle for these 4 critical squares. It's a very good idea to position there as many pawns as you can. And again, you're just doing fine. So if black takes on d4, you take on d4. You are knight f3, bishop d3, castles, bring the king to the safety, develop your pieces. And as usual, keep eyes open. So, how should we try to develop our pieces? And when the beginner makes the very first steps, he doesn't know with what to start because he has read no books or any courses, and he just randomly play something like f3 or g3. Somebody likes to play h4 even, but those moves don't do any good. So again, we want to take the center. So e4, first move, if we can, d4. So this is the e4 move. This is e4. That's the e pawn. This is d4. This is d4. And we want to put the pawns on two squares here. And then typically the knights go out, knight f3 and knight c3. So we play e4, d4, try to grab the center. We support the center by developing the knights, typically on the third rank, not h3, not a3. Because the knights on the edge of the board, they're standing pretty terribly. So we want to bring every single piece we have closer to the center. Because again, the one who controls the center controls the game. And also, as a rule of thumb, you almost always want to develop your knight before the bishop. So the reason actually is, for example, like this. So if we ever, in a similar position, we play something like bishop c4, there are moments when you're weakening the pawn on g2. So that's why it's a good idea. You start with the move knight f3, you develop the knight, you hit something in the center. If he defends it, we develop the bishop, and now the pawn on g2 is not under attack, and we can always cast a short very quickly and continue to fight for the center. Another example. So in this position, we have gained the center. So we play d4, d4. As you see, we have two center pawns here. Black at the same time is very modest. He played c6, d6, and he is ignoring the center. Now the question is, you have a choice. You can play knight f3. So with the blue arrow, this is knight f3. With the green arrow is queen f3. And with the red arrow is knight e2. So which move are we going to choose? If it helps, I think it's a good idea to use elimination method. So let's maybe rule out a couple of things we basically never ever want to do. It's a bad idea to start with queen move early. Yeah, by the way, this is a pretty common thing. There's a lot of players who like to move the queen out early, especially if you see something like a scholar's mate. Queen f3, queen f7, bring the bishop on c4, and try to checkmate your opponent in 5 moves. Which is a nice attempt, but normally it's not going to work against prepared opponent. So there's the rule that a queen should move basically as the last piece. Why? Because it's the most valuable piece on the board. It costs 9 units. And basically any piece that's going to hit your queen, like the knights or the bishops or the rooks or the pawns, it means that your queen will have to move every single time. So somebody attacks your queen, it moves again. And if your queen moves more than once in an opening phase, it means that you do not develop other pieces during this time. And that means you are staying behind the development, which is a bad thing. So that's why it's a good idea. Always follow the pattern, same pattern. Take the center, develop the knights, develop the bishops, castle short, and only then think about the queen. So queen f3 we can completely remove as an opportunity here. Knight d2 here, the red move, red arrow, also makes no sense. Because remember, we want to position the knights on the third rank. So I would maybe put it here on c3 so that it doesn't block the bishop on c1. And also I'm fighting for the center. Maybe also the question, why on c3, why not on d2? What's the big difference? Well, the difference here is that with the knight on c3, we are fighting for the center a bit better. For example, here the correct move is knight f3. And why knight f3 is a better move? Because we're not blocking the bishop, so the bishop is going to come out. We are directly fighting for the center with moves like knight e5 or knight g5. We protect the d4 square. So if we play something like knight e2, we just create ourselves problems. We are kind of protecting the pawn on d4, but we are blocking the bishop on f1. So this means probably your knight will have to move again. And we are not controlling the e5 square with the knight. That's why here knight f3 is the correct way to play. Another example. So here we have played out an opening. Both players are more or less copying each other. And we have a choice to play 3 moves. So with the green arrow, it's knight e5. I mean, we try to trade off some pieces in the center, see what happens. The second move is with the red arrow, bishop d2. Just complete development. Or the third move is with the blue arrow, bishop g5. How do we make the choice? And I can perfectly understand the players who are afraid to make long moves, because the further you extend your piece, the more afraid you are that what if you're blundering something? But you want to give your pieces the best possible squares. And bishop g5 is a great move because we're pinning the knight on f6, so this is what we call a pin. You see, this knight is not moving because the queen is under attack, so queen costs 9, the knight is only 3, so clearly black is not interested to move the knight. And now we want to play knight e5, hit the knight here and exploit the pin, and maybe go for an attack. So why not knight e5? Because knight e5 we will be breaking one of the rules, that in an opening phase, try not to move the same piece more than once. So this knight already was played knight c3 before. Now it moves for a second time. So if we play bishop g5 here, so this is the first move of the bishop, every single piece, at least the amount of pieces developed, we have created the pin. And there's also an immediate threat of playing knight e5, trying to hit the knight on f6 and creating some problems for black at the king side. Let's move on. Another example here. So we have three choices. This is one of the London systems. We have with the blue color, bishop g5 move. We have with the green color, queen b3. And we have with the red color, bishop d3. So which move do we make? Again, same logic. So we do not move the dark square bishop to g5 with the blue color. Why? Because the bishop already is moving for the second time. And I think it's a good idea that you ask yourself, why would I spend one tempi more for the bishop's development? It already stands great on f4. Why do I need it positioned on g5? What's the difference? So it stands pretty well right there. Then we remember the rule about the queen. We try not to move the queen early. So with the green arrow, queen b3. What's he doing there? I don't really know. I'm about to lose probably time and he's going to attack my queen. I'll have to go back. So it's got to be bishop d3. We're just strictly continuing our development. So again, we're putting a bishop on a great square. We're fighting for the central squares. And we're about to castle short. And then basically see what happens. Another example. So we have three moves with the bishops. Which move to choose? We can go the green arrow, bishop b5 check. Very tempting move because you give a check to the king. What if it's a mate? Yeah, it's a good try. We can play bishop c4, the red arrow, or we can play bishop d2, the blue arrow. How do we choose? Which is the right move? So we are going to follow strictly the same rule. We want to castle as quickly as possible. And even though long castle is an opportunity for you, so for a long castle, you have to move the dark square bishop, you have to move the queen. But for the moment, I would not really recommend it. Learn just to castle short and see what happens. So that's why bishop d2, it just feels strange. I don't know what the bishop does on d2. Actually, it just blocks the queen, makes your other pieces look worse. And the green move, bishop b5 check, it's very tempting. But if you do this, you are only forcing black to play c6, and there's a problem. c6 is actually a useful move for black, and your bishop has to move again. Why? Because it costs 3 and the pawn is 1. That's why it's not a good idea to make moves that's going to force your piece to move again in an opening phase. So the correct move is bishop c4. So we are removing the bishop to castle short. We're fighting for these 4 central squares. As you can see, the bishop is controlling the d5 square. It controls the diagonal here. And again, keep your eyes open. Another example. So after the opening phase, we have 3 moves. We have with the red arrow, knight g5. Hit the pawn on f7. You see we have the bishop here. We have the knight here. So we're thinking about generating some threats. It's a very popular thing at the club level. The second move is bishop b5. Try to take the knight on c6 so that we are winning the pawn on e5. And the third move is the green arrow, d4. Which move to choose? Same principle. Every single piece in an opening phase moves once. So if you want to play knight g5, this is a very obvious target. Your opponent is not going to miss it. He's going to cast a short. And this idea of knight f7, bishop f7, king f7, it might feel it's equal, like I won a rook and his king is weak. But you just gave two minor pieces for it. And you moved other pieces twice. Some of the pieces even more than once. Yeah, so the knight was 1, 2, 3 times. The bishop was 1 and 2. And during this time, you gain nothing. The black king is just going to go back. And you're just behind the development. So that's why we're not going to play knight g5. The same applies for bishop b5 here. You want to win a pawn on c6, but the problem is this is a pretty obvious threat. And your opponent could just defend the pawn by playing d6. So we just play bishop c4. Now we're playing bishop b5. That's why maybe whenever you're choosing the opening phase, you want to play bishop b5, you do it immediately. So if you decide to put the bishop on c4, let it stay on d4. And that's why the correct move is d4. We're fighting for the center. Another example. So this is a Scandinavian defense, by the way, a pretty popular chess opening. Black just played queen takes on d5, queen a5, move the queen on the edge of the board, and we have 3 moves. So we can play with the blue arrow, bishop c4, continue development. We can play with the red arrow, bishop b5, check. Maybe it's a mate, you never know. Or we can try to fix the center. We remember something about the mobile center of the green arrow, d4, d5. Now, which move do you think we can rule out immediately? I think it's the d4, d5 move, because you're not fixing anything. So there's no knight on c6. I think this d4, d5 makes sense if the black knight stands on c6. Then you play d5 and you attack the knight, and you force your opponent to do something that he does not want to do. But when this pawn is not attacking anything, this is simply a waste of time. Why do not we want to play bishop b5 check? Because the same reason. I mean, your opponent could just play c6 and your bishop has to retreat, or maybe even bishop d7. So we're trading the bishops, but the point is your bishop is moving for a second time. Why did we trade the bishop? We do not know. So when you do not know, you simply give your bishop the best possible diagonal, which is c4. You're opening up the king's way to cast a short, and then again you see what happens. Do not be afraid you're going to blunder the bishop. Of course, at every given moment, pay the first and foremost attention to your opponent's last move. So for example, your opponent plays queen b4, he hits the bishop. Of course, you're not going to rush with the short cast, so you have to pay attention to your opponent's last move. Why did he play queen b4? Oh, he wants to hit the bishop on c4. Probably you have to defend it, so you play something like bishop b3. Another example. So let me show you a very famous Legals checkmate. So this is going to be a very good example of how the development advantage can materialize in the victory. So we start by occupying the center with e4, e5, and bishop c4. So this makes sense. I mean, I did say that normally we don't want to develop the bishop before the knight, so you can start with knight f3 and then you play bishop c4. I mean, in this case, it doesn't really matter. Bishop c4 is still okay move. So now you play knight f3, and here black plays bishop g4. It makes sense, right? So he develops the knight, he develops the bishop, he pins your knight, and he hopes that you're going to touch the knight, he takes your queen. Now we play knight c3 with the help of our pieces. And now, for example, black plays g6, which is a pretty strange move because he wants to play bishop g7 and knight f6 or knight e7, see what happens. But now you have to know this idea. This is what we call Legal's mate, Legal's trick. Knight e5. Now it's a pretty stunning move because, wait a second, what happens after bishop takes on d1? Are you not blundering the queen? That's actually the trick. Bishop takes on f7. So you see, the black king cannot take on f7, black king cannot take on d7, because the knight stands here, control these squares. So king e7. And now comes the mate. That's it. So you're checkmating the king with just the knight on the board. So there's no squares to go. So this is what we call Legal's mate. And it's a very, very famous trick. It has many versions. And this is something where you can win a lot of points. And obviously, black doesn't really have to do that. He could play d6 on e5. But now you take the bishop on g4. You just enjoy the extra pawn. And probably you're going to win the game anyway. Another example. So, the thing about why do you have the castle short as quickly as possible? Before we look at more examples, I would like to explain is that keeping the king in the center for a prolonged time is a bad idea. So you want to, again, grab the center, e4, d4, play knight f3, bring out the bishop, castle short very quickly. So if you're not castled by move 10 or so, you are potentially in trouble. Yeah, so let's have a look at some of the examples, what I mean with that. So here, we have taken the center, we have the bishops that are supporting the center, and now we have a choice. Short castle or long castle? Well, actually, I did say that castling long is pretty dangerous, and I think you should learn castling short first. But if we still would like to be creative and we would like to consider castling other way, why not long castle? Because long castle, your king is going to be exposed. You see, you have these pawns. They're very far advanced from your king. So if you like, it's like a comparison with an umbrella. You go out in a rainy day, so the rain really is pouring, and you overextend your umbrella. Obviously, you're going to get wet, right? So there's a very good reason you should keep the umbrella very close to your head. And that's why you can treat the pawns in chess like an umbrella to your king. You don't want to push them forward. They should stay as close to your king as possible. And there's a principle, do not move the pawns in front of your king unless you know what you're doing. So that's why here, of course, it's short castle. As you can see, this is your umbrella. It protects your king against any potential rain shower. Another example here. Which way do we castle? Short or long? Well, here actually it's a long castle. Because castling short here tactically fails. And this is what we call the Greek gift. Your king here is not safe. By the way, remember the main principle. Why do we castle? There's two principles, not one. Why do we castle at all? So the first thing is bring the king to the safety. Second thing is connect your rooks together because they best operate together. Sometimes castling does not improve your king's safety. Like here, if you castle short, you allow bishop takes on h7. After king takes on h7, you allow knight g5. If you take it, you allow queen h5. This is a very famous idea. You're getting checkmate. That's a mate. It's a very, very famous idea. So you can't do it. And if you don't take the knight on g5, you go here, there's queen h5. Again, there's a mate. So this is typically blundered at the club level. So here castling short is pretty dangerous. I mean, you could play first h6 and then play castle, but you have to be really careful. So this is one of those moments when you can castle long, although your king is feeling quite vulnerable and this umbrella is very much extended. But already, if you're thinking about the consequences after you castle short, are you improving the king's safety or you're just making it worse? You're making a step in the right direction. And one more final example here. Which side are we going to castle? Is it going to be short? Is it going to be long? Or is it going to be king e7? So short castle is the blue arrow. Long castle is the green arrow. King e7 is the red arrow. Now, what is the safest way for you to position the king? There will be moments where you can actually decide to play king e7. Why? Because the king feels safe. Look at this umbrella. It surrounds the king. These are not going to be a lot of moments when the king in the center is going to be feeling safe. But that's why we do not automatically castle short without looking actually what's happening on the board. For example, short castle is incredibly dangerous. Your opponent goes here. Your opponent goes somewhere here. And does it really feel our king is in safety? No, it does not feel. So if we castle long, does it really feel our king has enough protection in front of it? No, it feels pretty exposed. That's why, again, keep your minds open. So what I said in the very beginning of this lesson, mostly try to castle short. And I think when you're going to be starting out, castling short will be perfectly fine. But there will be moments when maybe a better idea is to keep the king in the center because it's just feeling fine. That's it. I hope it was of some use. And now you're going to think about some of these key elements. And good luck starting out and enjoy studying chess.